The two types of honey that we're serving today come from the local area, of course. One is fireweed, which comes from the cut blocks directly behind us here, the top of Clark Road. It's a superb area for keeping bees. The other honey is blackberry honey, which comes from the Sooke Potholes area, and from a friend's farm in the Sooke Potholes area. Both are quite unique natural honeys. We focus on natural honey here. Our labels say natural honey on it, and you might be wondering, well, what the heck is natural honey? I thought all honey was natural. Well, in fact, natural honey, we call it natural because it comes from non-cultivated sources, from areas that are not under crop cultivation, from areas like the woods, the cut blocks and behind us, or from old farm areas and stuff like that, or secondary growth areas where there's mixed forests of much diversity, because bees need that diversity. And you think, well, how can a cut block provide diversity? I mean, it's all cut down. But in fact, the pioneering plants that come back into cut blocks are very diverse. You know, trailing blackberries, salal, slender hawkweed, curly everlasting, and fireweed, of course.
Broom.
Oh, broom, yeah, for sure, lots of broom. Yeah, let's not forget broom. It doesn't provide much nectar. Unfortunately, there's no nectar from it. Otherwise, we'd all be swimming in broom honey. But it does provide pollen, which is an equally important source. Pollen is the protein source for bees. Without pollen, the bees could not raise their brood, and the colonies would peter out. So broom is essentially a very important thing, although we all sort of love to hate it. But it's important, I think, to recognize that there's great diversity in the cut blocks up there, and great diversity in these mixed secondary and tertiary forests that are starting to grow back with maples and alder and all sorts of other, you know, brambles like blackberry brambles and things. So think about that while you're tasting some of the honey in here. There's a lot of people, we were just talking about this, Keith and I were talking about this just before he pulled up, about a lot of people around the world who recognize island honey, Vancouver Island honey, particularly fireweed honey, as being one of the most unique and interesting and flavorful honeys in the world. We travel all around the world and in various holidays and things, and talk to people and go out buying honey from different people, and you'd be surprised how many people know about fireweed honey and Vancouver Island honey. So we're very fortunate to have the ability to keep bees in this area. I've kept bees from as far south as New Mexico to as far north as the Yukon Territory, and the 45 or so years that I've kept bees, actually it's closer to 50 years now, but I always keep coming back to Vancouver Island honey, so it's quite unique. To get back to bees and diversity, some of you may have heard about the demise of bees, that bees are dwindling, that there's a dramatic decline in populations of bees, and it is true. Over the last few years, we've seen a decline in bees that has taken us down to maybe, I think, an average 35–40% losses per year now in beekeeping. And this is of great concern to our industry. It's not because of cell phones, so you can all turn your cell phones back on. It's okay, you can have cell phones out here. I'm not going to get stressed if you got a cell phone on you. It isn't because of cell phones. It is really because of lack of genetic diversity, lack of control on pesticides. We have pesticides now that have never been more lethal for insect life, and probably never more safer for vertebrate life, like mammals like us. But they are incredibly lethal pesticides. We have bioaccumulation of pesticides and toxins, and we have climate change all happening here, all to combine against bees and conspire against bees. for example, just the cold spring we're having right now is causing a slow buildup in our bee colony. They don't get out and move around as fast. They don't get as much foraging time because the temperature's a few degrees cooler. And you can see that by the lack of movement in this colony. It's still clustered from the previous night. In a couple hours when it gets warmer, they'll break up that cluster and start moving around. They can't get out of this hive, of course, but if they could, they would start going out to forage, like the beehives behind you down there. You may see the odd little bee flying around down there if you look. But the cold weather and inclement weather does play a big role in stressing bees out, just like it stresses us out if winter goes on too long. You want to get on a plane and fly somewhere else. So it's a big aspect, and all of these aspects combine to cause a perfect storm, if you will, to causing grief to bees. And so we're quite concerned about that. In our own industry, we're quite concerned with the lack of genetic diversity amongst our queens and resilience and toughness amongst our queens. For many years we've been fighting an ectoparasitic mite called varroa, and varroa is a devastating mite. It's a reason I mention this study is not because we're into it here, but because it's part of that whole connection to the cup blocks up in the hills, because ultimately we need to breed those queens. But queens breed in the air. They fly up into the air, they meet some drones, the male equation in the hive, and they mate mid-air, maybe 30 to 70 or 100 meters in the air, and they're mating with several drones and then coming back to the hive. Now we need areas that are free of other drones that we don't want them to mate with, and the areas that we use are up in the cup blocks because there's just not very many bees in certain areas up there, at least not of this type. So we can make sure that we get good, clean, pure mating, but only if we can get up, into the cup blocks. If we tried it in here, I've got 4 or 5 other beekeepers around me here. I might get their stock mixed in, and it would be less, it would be like having your show grade poodle meet up with a dachshund. Not such a good thing, right? So yeah, so that's another reason we like going up into the mountains.
And we run into the problem in Victoria that by about the middle of July, all the forage is gone.
Yeah, there you go.
There's no flowers. All the trees have finished flowering. The blackberry is done. Now what do we do? So that's why we love to come out here to the forest. We can bring our hives out here. We've got another month and a half of forage for our bees.
Yeah.
We can produce a lot of honey out here.
Yeah, and it gets back to that diversification of forage, right? A lot of people will say, well, how come bees are not doing so well? One of the things is our monocultural cropping systems, our huge agronomic farms that we have, 10,000 hectares of alfalfa or canola or beet or whatever. We've got bees that go out there and they forage on that area, and sure, they got 10,000 hectares of canola blossoms to forage on, but that's for maybe a 3-week period. After that, because it's Roundup ready canola, maybe there's not even a weed to be seen. The blossoms die off. It's like a desert to them. It would be like us being set loose in the Sahara Desert and told to go find some food growing somewhere. It just isn't going to happen. And so that is like the worst case scenario. Everybody goes, oh, farms, wonderful, they've got to be great for bees. Farming's wonderful for bees. Large-scale farming that is monocultural farming is actually one of the worst things you can do for beekeeping in the world. And you look at the collapses that are occurring in the bee industries around the world, and they are directly proportional and linked to large-scale industrial monocultural farming. They're not linked to forestry and clear cuts and things. They're linked to farming.